In his two short story collections, Twice Told Tales from 1837 and Mosses from an Old Manse, 1846, Hawthorne explores a particular kind of male character. The male character who, through some sort of troubled choice or through some sort of set of unfortunate circumstances, finds himself alienated not only from those around him, but alienated from time itself. What does that mean? There are characters who seem to lose their place, who seem to fall outside of the developments of history, who seem to fall outside normal cycles of growth and decay. And this extreme isolation leads generally to a hardening of the heart and, of course, a bitter, sad life. Let me be specific. So we can think, first of all, of Hawthorne's most famous short story, Young Goodman Brown, probably his most famous story, where the protagonist, young Goodman Brown, lives in 17th century New England time when the Puritans ruled that part of the country. He makes his way out into the forest, ostensibly to meet with the devil, to participate in some satanic rite. And along the way, he meets various kinds of people from the community, and concludes that the people from his community, seemingly pious, are in fact hypocritical and are Satan worshippers at heart. And near the end of the story, he thinks he sees his own wife Faith there. Now, of course, throughout the story, we learn that it's difficult to tell the difference between illusion and reality out in the forest. Especially for someone like young Goodman Brown, who's so consumed by his sense of guilt and suspicion. So by the end of the story, Goodman Brown comes back to his village and feels disconnected from everyone. He feels that everyone is a hypocrite, everyone is a sinner, and that he can't connect with any of them. But the story suggests this could well be a delusion. That it is young Goodman Brown's own sense of guilt, suspicion, paranoia even, that leads him to a life that is joyless, loveless, friendless. The same can be said of Reverend Hooper in The Minister's Black Veil, story from 1837, Twice Told Tales. Reverend Hooper shows up one day, again set in 17th century New England, shows up one day to his congregation with a black veil hanging over his face. No one knows why he did it. The entire story is composed of people trying to interpret why this man would show up one day with his veil. Is he doing it to symbolize that all of us are hiding something? Is he doing it to symbolize that he himself is hiding something? Is he doing this to symbolize that everything seen in reality is black, dark, sinful at the core? We never know. But he becomes a figure of great fear and fascination to his congregations, to his community. But this veil keeps him from connecting with anyone in an intimate and what we could probably call healthy way. His fiancée says, "Please take your veil off so I can see your face and we can connect." But he will not do it. And he, like Goodman Brown, leads a life of alienation, loneliness, and dies a sad man. We can see this in other stories as well. Roger Malvin's burial, for instance. Why is Hawthorne interested in this? It seems like he himself struggled with a reticence to participate in what we might call a normal communal life. And this reticence he was constantly battling with. As I said, he spent 12 years after graduating college basically in the top floor of his mother's house in Salem and doing research on the past. A very solitary life, living among the creations of his own mind and not connecting with anyone in a really intimate way. Of course, he overcomes this. He meets Sophia Peabody and eventually marries her. Also, he tries to participate in this utopian community, Brook Farm. But Hawthorne had a real sense of what it's like to be afraid to connect with others. What happens? When you connect with others, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be trusting. You have to be empathetic. And these virtues are difficult for some people. So people construct fictions that allow them to justify not being vulnerable or trusting or empathetic. That's what young Goodman Brown does. Before he even goes out to the forest, he probably is someone who is afraid to be intimate with other people. He leaves his loving wife, Faith, at the door to go out into the forest at nighttime. And she says, please don't go. But he goes. What kind of person does this? Someone who's clearly afraid of intimacy. So his vision of everyone in the village as a hypocrite is a kind of enabling fiction that allows him to justify what is already true of him. And we could say the same of Reverend Hooper. So why am I bringing this up in our discussion of House of the Seven Gables? Let's look at Clifford. Clifford has had a difficult life. He was accused of murder and has spent a very long time in prison, 30 years odd, and now he is out. But there's a sense, and we learn this in The Arched Window, in the novel, that chapter, The Arched Window, that he has lost his place in history. He is afraid of modern technology, like the train, say, because while in prison, he did not see the train come into being and the train become a customary means of transportation. So he's horrified of the train. He wants to go back in time to carriages. He'd much rather hear the rumble of a carriage over the cobblestones than he would hear a train engine. And the narrator says this is someone whom time has left behind, who is disconnected from his world. Now, we probably don't want to say of Clifford what we would say of young Goodman Brown and Reverend Hooper. Clifford seems to be more of a victim of circumstance than someone who has actively chosen a life that alienates him from others. But the result is the same. He can't connect with anyone outside of the House of Seven Gables. It's even difficult for him to have anything like a normal friendship, we might say, with even a Hepzibah or a Phoebe or a Wholegrave. He can certainly interact with these people, but there's something stunted about him. There's something childish about him. If Goodman Brown and Hooper move too far into the realm of experience, a sense of life as hard and deceptive, sinful, and if they react to this vision of the world through having bitterness and contempt and melancholy, Clifford's on the other side. He's too much of a child to have a mature adult relationship. He is, as I say, stunted. And there's a sense that he can't connect with someone and develop a mature relationship. So let's think about how time works in the House of the Seven Gables. We see someone like Clifford who is so disconnected from his temporal moment that he seems to be a character from another time and place. It seems as almost he's a child as an adult. We wonder if he is sane in a world that values reason. So in other words, he is a consummate misfit. And this misfit can be described in temporal terms. How do other characters relate to time? Well, look at someone like Geoffrey Pynchon. He is fully and aggressively connected to time. If time is growth and decay, if time is progress toward a goal, if time is revenge, waiting out, purposefully trying to pay someone back. In other words, for Pynchon, Geoffrey Pynchon, we can use that word. Time is purposeful. It is teleological. It is goal-oriented. But connected to this man is imagery of iron. Like his relative, the colonel, he is spoken of as a man with iron will. So is he any more alive than someone who is divorced from what we might call the normal rhythms of time? Because he wants to make time stop. He wants to be essentially Colonel Pynchon. He wants to have right now in the present exactly what his family has always had. He is trying to channel the past and make the past dominate over the present. So we see in him someone who we might say is too much attached to time. If Clifford has no attachment to time, Pynchon has too much attachment to time. And both men are stunted for these reasons. Pynchon, of course, is a man who is icy on the inside and manipulative and ultimately cruel and evil. And this cruelty, this evil, this iciness comes out of his desire to make time stop, to keep a kind of persistence and permanence of the Pynchon line. Whereas, again, with Clifford, there's no connection to time at all. Now, there's a third male character in House of the Seven Gables who has an interesting relationship to time, and of course, that is Wholegrave. And Wholegrave in the chapter called The Daguerreotypist, unlike Geoffrey, he cares nothing about the past. He says Wholegrave does, the past is only dead men. It's dead. It should have no bearing on us. It should have no control over us. It should have no meaning whatsoever. He looks only to the future. Is Hawthorne holding him up as a kind of paragon, as someone who has a healthy relationship to time, in a way that Geoffrey and Clifford don't? Well, that's difficult to say. On the one hand, yes, he does embrace what is now. And he embraces modern technologies. He practices modern technologies as a daguerreotypist. He's interested in all the recent kind of intellectual fads. And that gives him a vibrancy, a vitality that the two other men I've been describing don't have. But at the same time, is it healthy to denounce the entire past? Is it healthy to say that the past is simply dead? Aren't there important energies from the past? Aren't there important lessons from the past? Aren't there important ways that we can connect to the past that inform our present moment with the kind of significance it wouldn't have if we lacked that past? So we have these three ways of thinking about relating to time in the novel. And it seems pretty clear that Geoffrey's relationship and Clifford's relationship are very problematic. The question is Hawthorne suggesting, or Hawthorne's narrator suggesting, that Wholegrave's embrace of the present and celebration of the future are significantly superior to the way that Clifford and Geoffrey relate to the temporal world? That's ambiguous, as I'm saying. So one thing to think about as we go through the novel is, do we ever see a character who relates to time in a way that the narrator seems to think is healthy? I'm talking about men only in this particular lecture because Hawthorne is very interested in his tales and in his fiction about a man's relationship to time. But then we would want to think about Hepzibah. She seems very much to be consumed by the past, and it seems that time has kind of left her behind too. She tries to adapt to the present by opening the shop, and in doing so shows a kind of fortitude and imagination that certainly Clifford is incapable of, and certainly someone like Geoffrey doesn't even have to worry about. The narrator seems to think that's admirable, even though certainly Hepzibah does this in an awkward way, opens up the shop. And then there's Phoebe, who in some ways seems to be a kind of blend between someone who embraces the past as the most important aspect of time, and someone who is enamored of the future as the most important aspect of time. Phoebe clearly is a Pynchon, but she's not controlled by any of the old traditions. But also, she values her past at the same time as a Pynchon, and values her relatives, Hepzibah and Clifford. But also, she's someone who is young and full of possibility and potentiality, and is not afraid to look to the future. And this is one reason why she admires Wholegrave. So I'll conclude this lecture by saying that there's something very gendered in Hawthorne's ideas about the relationship to time. It appears that, at least in The Scarlet Letter with Hester Prynne, and in House of the Seven Gables with Phoebe, and to some extent Hepzibah, that women seem to relate to the temporal world in healthier, more flexible, pliable, powerful ways than men.